I wanted to ask you about Warner women. Do they really exist?
Wow. Um, they do exist. I think they're a kind of dying breed. Yeah, I don't think they exist in the way that they might have existed even 20 years ago or 30 years ago. I think all cultures suffer that kind of. It still exists in strange ways. Like I still can go on a bus in Jamaica and hear a woman shouting out hell and damnation, and she probably won't call herself a Warner woman anymore, but she's clearly still moving in that trajectory. So there are all of these places where you see remnants of that culture still emerging in everyday life. I guess that was part of the title, The Last Warner Woman, because I think, probably in another 20 years, we probably won't see any more of that. In order to write the book, I remember going to several revival churches in Jamaica, which were always pretty far out of the way, in very rural communities. Um, and I know that was always kind of wonderful and bizarre to see them. I mean, I think even as a Jamaican living in Jamaica, still there is something about the revival church that feels very militant and fundamentalist. And I think I was a little bit scared to enter into their church, though. I have to say, every single time I entered, and there would be these people, standing at the gate, looking at me very suspiciously, demanding, what was I doing there? And I'd say, well, I've just come to the service. And every single time I said this, the woman, the mother of the church or whatever, she'd always melt and say, oh, good to have you here. Walk with God. Go inside. And it is always strange how you expect a certain kind of reaction, but they'd never give that. They're always welcoming, really. So, yeah, it's still there.
I even remember in acknowledgements that you thanked someone for allowing you to have some irregularities in the English language.
Right.
Could you say a couple of words about this? Why it's so important?
For me, writing is all about language, and it's about playing with language and having fun with it. But I don't want to pretend that what I'm trying to get with the language is some kind of sociological truth or some actual truth, because you have to take liberties with it, and I'm not representing it as it actually is. I'm trying to make it literary. I'm trying to elevate it and do something else with it. So on one hand, you want to start with it can't be actual English, but at the same time, it can't be precisely what the Warner woman would say or what Jamaicans or how Jamaicans talk naturally, because then no one would understand it. And the fun of writing it is trying to find this language in the middle that takes a very common way of speaking, in a place like Jamaica, in a place like the Caribbean, and making it literary, making it, kind of beautiful and accessible to a whole other range of people. And I think for me, the trick of writing is always, how do I write something that a Jamaican will read it and think, oh, that's exactly how I speak? And I want to fool them to think that that is exactly their language. But in my mind, I think, no, it's not exactly, but I want you to think it is. And that's a delicate balance, to find a language that a Jamaican will own and identify with, and someone from the outside will not feel excluded from it, will not look at it and think, what the hell is going on here? They can fall into it easily and follow. And I think that's always what I'm trying to do.
I'd like to ask you if there are some common facts in your biography, your life, and your novel.
Let me think. The thing is, I think there often are, but I think sometimes they're so hidden that sometimes even I forget them. But so much of the experience of the writer going to Jamaica in order to research a book was my experience of standing in a line and waiting to see records and finding nothing there, finding things scribbled down on paper that were erased, was my experience of going back to Jamaica, trying to find that leper colony, and not being able to find it and having to ask an old taxi man was my experience of going back to Jamaica and trying to find these places and trying to write about it. So there's lots, but I'm not sure if it's so much about biography exactly. I think I think there's something I was trying to do with that novel, The Last Warner Woman. And even though I fictionalized the writer and I made him biracial and I made him English and all kinds of things, in a way, his impulse is my impulse. That I think I often approach a story and I want to make it beautiful and I want to, celebrate, these kinds of nostalgic ways of being. And the fact that the Warner woman keeps on interrupting him and saying, no, that's not the way to tell a story. I wanted someone to interrupt how I tell a story. Because I think sometimes the ways I tell a story, sometimes those ways are problematic. And if I had another voice to almost counteract my own impulses, that would make it interesting. So I think how the writer man writes, trying to make it beautiful and trying to change facts is how I write. And I wanted the Warner woman to disagree with me.
Hello, my name
Hello.
is Nastya, and I would like to ask you, you write mostly about Jamaica and the Caribbean, and how important is it for a writer to keep in touch with his roots, and do you think that you would ever write about another place other than the Caribbean?
I don't think I would, no. And no, I don't think it's important that a writer should stay in touch with their roots. I think it's important for me. But it's never something that I think I should be that I should feel that the way I write is the way all writers should write. But I think the Caribbean is my project. And for me, one of the reasons is that so much of my writing is about language, and I can't write about somewhere that I can't manipulate the language enough. If that makes any sense. So I can only write about the Caribbean because it's the only language that I can fall into and do interesting things with it.
Yes,
even though I live in Scotland now, I don't feel that I have the right yet to play with the Scottish language. I think I'd be offensive to them if I did that. But also I think there's, in my mind, there's a project that I want to write something. I know this is going to sound ambitious, but I want to write a large literature from a small place. That I think that there's a way in which, when we're not from places like New York or London, people feel that we're not writing about real things or real people, and we can continue to write about, our little small villages elsewhere, but there's always this question, when will you write like a real book? And I think I want to reject that, and I want to write a kind of world-class literature about a small place. And anytime, especially people in London ask me this question, will you write about something else? Meaning in their mind, will I write about London? I always think, no, screw you. So now I almost reject that kind of impulse, and because it's almost as if people are saying that every country, every corner of the world has a small allotment of books, and perhaps Jamaica is allowed 4 books, and now that I've written 4 books about Jamaica, it has gotten its due. I should write about something else, and I think no, Jamaica hasn't gotten its due yet, and I'll continue to write about it.
Well, good. We look forward to it. And another question that sort of ties in to the previous one. I read an article by you where you wrote that most people don't know the real Caribbean, that there are tourists, and then there's a kind of invisible wall, and then after that, beyond that, there's the Caribbean.
I remember that article, and I wrote it some time ago, and I think probably now I have a different kind of opinion than what I wrote then. Like perhaps now I think I don't like the ways in which people from any country, like me as a Jamaican, could say that this is what the real Jamaica is, and what someone else experiences is not the real Jamaica. I probably don't agree with that anymore. I think everywhere in this world has several concurrent realities that are happening at the same time. And if you see Jamaica as a tourist, you are seeing the real Jamaica, but it's one version of Jamaica. And if I live in Jamaica, in a certain part of Jamaica, I see another part of Jamaica, but someone who is living right beside me in that very moment sees another reality. And that reality is just as valid. And you know, just thousands of concurrent realities of a place are always happening at the same time. And all we can do is write about reality as we see it, which is why I think, you know, everyone should write about places and about realities, because realities are so multiple and they happen concurrently and they contest each other in interesting ways. So no, I don't believe that one reality is superior over any other.
I want to ask you about the idea of your novel. How did you come up with it? Because it's so complicated. You have two narrators and the stories overlaps one another. So how did it happen?
Oh wow. Yeah, novels have so many strange beginnings, and you know, anytime I tell someone that here's the beginning of the novel, I find out later on that that wasn't the beginning. I think whatever I tell you will inevitably not be true, because writers invent stories and we convince ourselves of that story, but it's never the true story. So one beginning I can tell you is that, and I mean all of these in a sense are true, you know, to some extent. When I went to Manchester to study, to do a master's, I remember waking up one morning, this is in England, and hearing a woman outside, and dogs were barking at her, and she kept on shouting hell and damnation to them. And it was an odd moment of hearing a voice and a sound that connected me back to Jamaica, and I forgot temporarily where I was, because it sounded so familiar. But then I woke up and I thought, no, I'm in England now. And I looked out, and there was this woman who was, you know, in Jamaica, she would have been a Warner woman. And she was out there on the pavements giving a warning. And that moment was beautiful to me. But everyone else in the flat complained about this mad woman outside. And I began to think about that, how in my mind she wasn't mad, but in England's mind she was. And that's one start of the story, just that image. Another start was simply the statistic that I'd always known, that the highest incidence of schizophrenia in England from around 1963 to very recently has been West Indian immigrant women. They were just routinely sectioned away and put into mental institutions. And I wondered if that was true or not. And I thought, again, that the Warner woman might be a good person to think through that story. You know, was she really crazy? Or was it just that England didn't understand her? But I also think that, I mean, having grown up in Jamaica, I have seen so many women who give themselves over to a kind of religious excess. And Jamaican culture understands that and they celebrate that. But I think that oftentimes these women probably really are crazy, but the culture hides it. And until you take them outside of that culture, you don't see it for what it is.
You said that there was a pressure from the reading public or from your publishers to write a real novel, meaning a novel about London or about a big city. Is there a pressure, again, from your publishers or agents or the readers who expect something of a writer, to exploit that exotic part of what you're writing, to write about Jamaica because it is exotic, because there are Warner women and other things that you don't often find in England or in Scotland?
We all live in this, you know, wonderful, global, contemporary world, and it's a little too backward to say anything complimentary about those aspects of life that are slipping into the past, and that we shouldn't write about that anymore. And I think I want to resist that impulse. You know, it's the ways I read reviews of, say, contemporary Indian novels nowadays, and one of them recently said, "Oh, it's such a wonderful Indian novel without the hint of a sari anywhere." And, you know, I think, I'm not sure I want to go to that kind of extreme where, you know, But I don't know. It's always a question I'm always asking myself, and I'm always looking over every story and every character and thinking, have they slipped into the exotic? But to me, the exotic means that they've slipped into a kind of untruth, and that's what I'm trying to resist. But all of that to say that I think I'm more aware than most writers that I keep on placing my novels in a risky place. And I think I'll continue to do that. And I think that risky place is that my characters stand on the verge of the exotic, and they stand on the verge of a kind of preciousness. And the trick for me is to keep them balanced there. I don't know how successful that always is, but I don't want to put them completely in the realm of, oh, we are completely modern, gritty characters. I want to place them somewhere else. And I want to take that risk and write truthfully about them and, sympathetically about them. If that makes any sense.